There's one skill every leader needs to develop. It's a skill that helps you to facilitate well. It makes it possible for you to lead people toward growth. What are we talking about? It's the skill of asking good questions. And not just asking questions, but asking good questions, asking effective questions. Because when you ask good questions, it helps your group members own the discussion. The ideas that you're all talking about, it helps them own it all at a deep level. And that's huge. Now, this idea of asking questions is something Jesus modeled. Jesus was asked 183 questions in the New Testament. He only gave a direct answer to 3 of them. Instead of giving quick answers, he asked questions. The New Testament actually records 307 questions he asked in response to the questions that was asked of him. Why would Jesus answer questions with questions? Is it because he didn't know the answer? No, he knew everything there was to know. Yet he chose to influence others by asking questions instead of offering well-crafted answers. And here's why. Asking someone a question actually has the power to influence people more than any other leadership skill. Why do questions have this power to influence? Well, there are many reasons, but here are a few. Questions help people to think for themselves, and that creates ownership. That's huge. We each have to own our faith journey. The best way to help the people you lead to own theirs is to guide the discussion by asking good questions. Now, why else is the skill of asking questions so influential? Well, questions encourage people to problem solve. Think about the best teachers you've had in school. Did they just give you all the information? Probably not. It's more likely they helped you to think and problem solve for yourself. That's because problem solving can actually ignite our passion for a subject. It gets us excited about what we're learning. And here's a really practical reason to develop this skill of asking good questions. When you ask a question, you are in control of the conversation. Think about it. How many times have you been facilitating a group discussion when all of a sudden one of the group members asks a question out of left field and the discussion veers completely off topic? Suddenly, the person who asked the question is driving the discussion. That's the power of asking questions. So what makes a good question good? I could answer that a lot of different ways. But the main thing to keep in mind is that good questions are discovery-based, motivated by a genuine desire to understand and connect with the other person. When you ask a good question, you're trying to find out something that you don't already know. Good questions start with your heart. Are you actually curious about the other person, or are you just trying to make a point? So if you're like a lot of leaders, you may be thinking that it's pretty valuable to ask good questions, but you also may be thinking, I'm not very good at it though. Maybe you've met a really skilled question asker and you've thought, man, I wish I could do that. That's just not me. Well, the good news is that asking good questions isn't a gift people are born with, it's a skill. And that means you can learn how to ask good questions. It just takes knowledge and some practice. Here's one way to think about asking questions. This diagram represents 3 levels of question asking. The questions start out basic and simple, but get deeper and more challenging. Your goal in this first section is to gather information. These are the kinds of questions reporters ask: the who, what, where, and when of whatever it is that you might be talking about with the other person. As you can see, this first level of questions represent a small part of the diagram. Most of the time, you won't ask a lot of these questions. Sometimes you may only ask one, but this is a great place to start. Some examples of these kinds of questions are: who was there? What did she say? And where did that happen? Sometimes just getting yourself into a question asking mode is the hardest part of asking questions in a real conversation. A good basic question to have on hand is, can you tell me more about that? The second level of questions represent the largest part of the diagram. Most of the questions you ask will be these level 2 questions. Their purpose is to gather context. You want to find out what the information you gathered with the level 1 questions actually meant to the person you're talking to. Some examples of these kinds of questions are: what did you think when he said that? How did that make you feel? How did you respond? Remember, as you ask these questions, you should be doing a lot of active listening. These questions build empathy. They show you care about the things the other person cares about, but only if you listen. So let's talk about this last section of the diagram. As you can see, it's small like the first section. You won't ask a lot of these questions, but they're key to helping others grow. The purpose of these questions is to encourage action. This is really important. Like the level 1 and level 2 questions, these level 3 questions have to be discovery-based. You need to be genuinely curious when you ask these questions. If you ask a rhetorical level 3 question, a question you already know the answer to, you may come across as overbearing or sarcastic or self-righteous. If you are intentional about asking level 3 questions though, from a posture of humility and curiosity, it can help the other person figure out his or her best next step. Here's some examples of these kinds of questions. If you could go back in time, is there anything you'd do differently? If you could sit down with that person, what would you say to him or her? What is preventing you from having a conversation with that person? It's not up to you to tell the other person how he or she should respond to circumstances, but by asking good questions, you can help them to think differently about those circumstances and imagine possible action steps to change those circumstances or find some kind of resolution and maybe even follow through on those steps. Good questions are powerful, but being a good question asker takes practice. I hope understanding level 1, 2, and 3 questions gives you some practical handles to help you become more intentional and more skilled at asking good questions.